Thank you very much for these encouraging words, Madam Ambassador. And now we're moving on to the presentations. I'm very happy to introduce Garri Raagmaa. I don't think if even he needs introduction, but Garri is a human geographer and expert of regional policy from the Tartu University, head of Pärnu College, and also one of the authors of the exhibition of the city identity. So you talk about the identity of a place, a city center, and I will also would add my own thought because when I talked about the human development report, then we saw that the a big talent city is growing, but at the same time many Estonians have more than one place because the cities do not function without villages, but the identities are disappearing. So can you give us the solutions, please?
You listened in your presentation and I was having in my eyes old Bergen Quarter, Hanseatic Quarter. That's magnificent. Ma saan aru, et eesti keeles võib edasi rääkida, eks ole?
But I think I can continue in Estonian now. So this was what I was asked to talk about, and when I was driving here, I listened and looked a little bit of the Andres Regis Bose presentation of the Congress, which takes place right now. It should take place in Bolzano, but because it's Corona, so it's a virtual Congress. So I think Mr. Bose was at home or in his office and talked about loneliness. And then I had a link to this presentation, loneliness. Where do people feel more lonely? In a big city, in a small city which has a nice city center, like Kuressaare, or where you can go hang around and you know people? So this is what my thoughts are derived from, and I have main three topics. Maybe I can get stuck with the first one. If you ask a lot of questions, then this is where we'll stay. So if you talk about the spirit of a place, and we are in Lihula right now, and I think there was a Norwegian Norsk Geografisk when there was an article published with my colleague. There was a very well-known tourism historian from Pärnu who was a co-author, and we looked at Haapsalu, which is the first resort town. So celebrating 200 years when these people started to take the waters. Then it was Kuressaare and then it was Pärnu. And Pärnu, because of its size and economic power, was able to move out ahead and today has secured its position as a summer capital. We were searching for the spirit of these three towns, and I think we found some. But now in the middle of Lihula, it's nice to think about it. So if you want to see this article, you can find this article, or I can send it to you if you let me know your email address. So if you talk about the identity of a place, how it's created and how does it function. Second block is the center and the hinterland. So if you talk about the countryside, why does the countryside need the center or the hub, and how does it function? So this is the 101 of geography. Maybe not all of you know that. And third topic, once we get there, is urbanization, which is the general imperative. We know it happens everywhere in the world. Then at the same time, we were able to draw a conclusion that the rest of the world is a bit more complicated because Estonia has become more westernized. That means that our own people tend to have more than one place of residence and they're looking for more space. At the same time, coronavirus, of course, caused a problem because there was a presentation at Rovaniemi where they said that the Finns are buying houses in Lapland in order to do work remotely. So times are interesting. And we're still discussing this with Hannes Palang. I'm not sure if he's listening, but then he said there is no corona doesn't change anything. Things will turn back to normal in no time. But we'll see. So people create the place. So we have no people. Then it's a coordinate somewhere on the moon. So I don't think people will be going to the moon yet, but a place impacts a person. And Paul Vidal-Duplass, the second half of the 19th century, a geographer, says that how the place makes a person makes a place, and then he walked around in the vineyards in south of France, where there's never been any wars, and everything is the same as it was 300, 500 years ago. Then you really understand that. And we know that France has really worked hard to make sure that all the small towns and small villages would survive, because they have the environment, they have the cuisine and nice people. And usually they have a little bit better weather as well. Maybe soon it will be the other way around, because the climate is changing. And people are socialized, so you have a family, then school, then place of work with your colleagues. So this is the everyday work. You have people, animals, space, and depends on the position of the society then. Who is a big guy, or the Sun King as they used to be, who created Versailles and many other interesting spaces, then he had more power. A small person has less power, but a small person in a social space can be very important. So what is impacting the environment there? So what talks about this location as an economic geographer, then it's I talk about economy a lot. Because in the world we have shrinking cities. If I show you a picture where the economy which used to be there has gone, and now they have not found a new leading field of economy, so everything is falling apart and you have this downward spiral. But there are other processes there as well. What is the policy of the state? There was a special page of the newspaper which described how the policy of the Estonian or the politics have worked up and down with the hand in hand with elections. Then you have the power which influences what happens in Estonia. We lost the local county governments, for example, which is also a bit of a shame sometimes. And then we need to see the people who actually developing things, who keep running things, but then who are the ones who are actually changing things. I know that some people have managed to change the image of Valga, for example. So hopefully there will be a new concept for that town. So this is classical view starting from Lefebvre, again a Frenchman. In 1974 he wrote a very well-known book about production of space. It was translated into English in 1991, and there was a boom in West, so everybody who did not read French before started to write things about it as well. So and then there was a book called The Third Space. So in our everyday space we have an understanding what is happening. It's abstract space for people, where we have economy, the government established new corona restrictions. We don't really know what we have to do, and then the economy is trying to sell you stuff and offer you real estate and change things as well, and it's going to insert things into your space. So 400 years, what do we have in Europe or in Estonia? But we had mostly forest. I think in the Netherlands 20% of the land is man-made, and the state creates a lot of rules, and people who live their daily life, this specific space, they only care when things start to happen. So they say that the state has hired some architects and city planners who have to find solutions, and say that the wind turbines are good or new residential area is good. But now if you're not successful and you convince, then you have you get resistance, as people say, not in my backyard and so forth. And this all exists in our current planning practice. But in small and older towns, it doesn't really work well because we have less conflicts, and they happen usually in bigger cities where people want to develop, add more things. And doesn't really mean it improves the space. If there's sort of random development, then you get this as an outcome. There is a. So these are the places which do not have the spirit of the place. So if you land in a place like this, you have no idea where you actually are. So my old supervisor, in his own doctorate thesis, came up with an idea that this identity is being created in three co-functioning forms. One is territorial or physical form. Then you have the institutions. So this is the social form, where the different organizations function. And third is symbolic. So there are some symbols which have a role. In the human society, this form or the symbol might be more important than the physical side, because we remember what happened when the bronze soldier was removed, because people have a tendency to allocate meaning to inanimate objects. Now, if you talk about the city centers or the central squares, actually include all, because there is a territorial aspect, there is institutions where people have to meet and they communicate. There's a focal point of power, so the city government or the county governor. And then there's symbols as well, Tõrva city, for example. They have a symbolic furnace. So the city center carries the role. Now, if you think about the centers and the improvement of centers, then this is very important, because there is nothing more important than the center for local population. And if it looks good, it looks impressive, you can show it to the others. At the beginning, some governors were against, but now if you look around, you can see that city centers are looking pretty good. It all has an impact. But this is also abstract, because we want to think that this is how it is. But in a way, I've also written about this. So there's an article which has been referred to a lot, where I've said, because it's how much is it functional and to which extent you can use this identity as a tool. It of course can cut both ways. But these are the three forms which function a certain way. I have noticed about 2 generations the critical limit, and for third generation then it becomes entrenched, and it's very hard to get rid of this. We had in the Republic of we had 2 generations during the Soviet era. In the Ukraine it was 3 generations of Soviet era, and there's a big difference. In some places there is identity, and in other places there isn't. So this is we can see with the Soviet influence as well. But identity is really a tough thing, because once it's in, it's very hard to get it out. And it's being handed down. So Estonian Republic versus the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic, where we know that Soviet powers wanted to then dismantle all the symbols, all the social structures were dismantled because all the leaders were taken away, the borders were changed. So once the Soviet Union collapsed, a few years it only took, and things were changed again, because it was within us. Because I remember my grandparents who had, because I think that I was quite young, they told me what's what. So that was the generational information being handed down. But of course, people don't really understand that. We don't really feel it, but it is missing. For example, if Lihula is no longer Lääne County, but you're in Pärnu County suddenly, then people don't really like that. Well, I think they didn't really bring the guns out, but there was a bit of a dissonance. So what's actually happening? So why am I no longer West County? Why am I Pärnu County? So is this going to change my history now? So why is it important? Because if we look at the identity of a location or the place, plays a very important role when you look at the reputation. So how do other people see us from outside? Who are we to somebody else? And if what we know of ourselves is this what our opinion is, or think if this is what is good, what we like, or is it something we are afraid of or we don't like it? And I have this graph here again. So this is a combination. We have the outside, because we have a lot of places in the world. We have over 4,000 villages in Estonia. So I'm sure that most of you can't even mention all the rural municipalities, never mind the villages, and you can't remember them all. So so if you said who is Pärnu, who is Kohtla-Järve, I've asked my students, and the Kohtla-Järve is they talk about miners, and Pärnu they talk about a nice lady in a summer dress. So you have a dominant stereotype, and that matters. But for the local people, so what is imaginary, what they would like to see, and what is a reality? So if there is a conflict, if there's a contradiction, that people feel embarrassed, that they'd rather not talk about their place, or rather leave, or the parents say that no, you should leave because there's nothing happens here. So it's emotions as well. It can be pragmatic as well, because it has to do with the economy. The economy is not too good, high unemployment, then the parents would want to send the kids to better places in the world. And now nobody really wants to live near the parents that much. So I think what they've done in Valga is actually impressive, because if you talk about the city space and the environment and the quality of it, then this is one of the sources of either pride or shame. Then there's a song, the depressive Estonian small towns. I nearly hit the ditch when I first heard that. So what we have done with the city centres is that we've made them much nicer. There is talk about it, there are pictures, people come and see it, they bring their friends, bring their guests. And with the city centre, we have to think and make sure that there's more socializing possible. So to get the companies to come in, so to amplify the social communication.
And it creates preconditions that the services are better there, and it becomes a chain reaction. One thing improves the other, and then hinterland that expands. We were invited to at Tapa, the hinterland was dominated by the railroad. It was dirty and expensive, and once you had the one retailer establishing his warehouses and processes there, it improved a lot. Tallinners have said that don't be high and mighty. Everyone can't come and work in Tallinn. We need a network. And this picture is very clearly drawing a line between countryside and the city. Park and Burgess came to more or less the same conclusion, just like Tartu. There is a city. Kant named it City for Tartu. It's a 50,000 people strong city. That is a picture of Chicago from early 1920s. There were areas delineated by national lines, ghettos. And the structure has been amended and improved. A post-modern city is continued by the high-rise city, and then gentrified enclaves. It happened in the West in 1960s. It's now happening in Tallinn, and the city spreads out to its edge city or suburbs. there is not much of a hinterland. There is a little bit of it because it's been planned in some cities in Estonia. It is quite vague when you try to draw the line between Tallinn and Harjumaa. And the same happens in smaller cities as well. The borders are not very clear. Walter Kristaller, whose theory has been forgotten, especially for the administrative reform in Estonia. And when Kant read Kristaller, he was reminded of Estonia. And that was a very clear structure in Baden-Württemberg. You would have 16 centers, you would have Munich as the capital, down to the last village shop. Since 1960s, they tried to merge sectors created by private sector and the cities and centers built by the public sector, and then in the middle of it, they built the pool. Of course, it didn't work. And that is a map drawn by Kant. As you can see, the center and hinterland picture has not changed much in Estonia. If you have something, more comes there. If you have more of it, even more people converge. And in this article, what we criticize is that European regional policy is about adding to where more people are coming already. And that means that the gap in Estonia becomes even stronger and stronger. Some pictures that I keep showing, these are from 2011. We don't have any fresher data. What are the hinterlands that provide people to these centers? It could be refreshed by now, but these are bigger centers. But we also have smaller regional centers. Here's where you see the hinterland for 5,000, the previous one for 10,000. There were slight differences. Tõrva and Otepää were added here. But in general, Estonia is county-based, and that has been the case for the past 1,000 years. What about urbanization? Where, when, and how? What kind of? Is that Feni? I don't know whether this new Mecca tower was completed. That is a Khalifa tower, because in Dubai money ran out. I know that movies have been made about that, but that is an icon for the vertical world. Money enables everything. Urbanization is added to it. The pictures from cities are very different. One is from the very center of Europe. You can't be in any more center. Kosice, a Slovak industrial town, occasionally very nice, and there is a region in the city, a small part, where they had the military, police, and Romas living in. And you can understand that if you drive a bus there, then you have to have two police officers accompanying you. And then Urbino, a classic Italian town in Urbino mountains. It takes a day and a half to get there. They have a university that has more students there than the rest of the population. There have lots and lots of museums and lots of Asian tourists. At the same time, we see cities losing their population. There are certain locations losing their economic base and then shrinking. This is not only in Estonia. That happens all over the world. Whenever there was some industry, it's still there. Eastern part of the US, China, naturally, and Europe, of course. Over the past few years, urban areas become larger and larger. OECD report on urbanization from 2000 to 2017, Estonia is the fastest urbanizing country in Europe, in OECD countries, sorry. But when we look at a European map, it's much more varied. We spoke about France in the beginning, south of France, central of France. It's periphery. Even TGV doesn't drive there. island that is flat and boring, southern Sweden, northern Italy. Yes, the coastal area plays a role. That's where we get the corona again and again. Eastern Europe has been shrinking, but that is 2001 to 2011. Estonia has certain mistakes there. The merger of parishes played a role. They didn't really understand what was happening on islands. But in principle, city regions have grown, also suburbs. And it's clearly linked with a map in the left-hand corner, where population is grown, hinterland loses people because the people leave from there. Late 90s, 2003, 2004, there wasn't any building market there because the price for building new houses was higher than the sale value was. You couldn't build new buildings because the value of real estate was so low. What's happening when we look inside as to who's traveling and where do they move? This is international travel or international migration 2007-2012. Yes, there are 450,000 people coming in and 200,000 people leaving. So foreigners coming in and people that have lived in these cities escape. 200,000 people have left to park residence, are moving to a cheaper area, a more humane area, of course the coastal area, old resort towns have become second house buildings, and finally they turn into retirement locations. The same happens in the US. Contrast isn't that stark, but international migration goes to New York and Miami and locals leave. The difference is that since the weather is still warm in Miami, they don't escape for climate, rather for crime, but in the north they move to somewhere where the weather is better. What happened in Estonia? We had a turn of migration moves. It's statistics, and you can argue ad infinitum. What was it like that? Because a calculation system was changed in 2015. But I believe this was actually the pattern before. We have become a rather wealthy country, and so people came here, didn't leave so much. And the picture describes the evolution of the situation in different counties. Pärnu was already in the plus, but Corona and drop of tourism industry has converted the trend as well. But yes, in general, the trend is that shrinkage in rural areas isn't that significant, and it's quite logical. There aren't that many young people there. Age structure of the population has changed. Yes, but the picture is a lot more varied. That is data from between two censuses, and that is population per square kilometer. There are some dark green dots where a lot of people have moved to, near Kohila. There are certain areas around Kohila that were rebuilt, some houses that were rebuilt into permanent dwelling, but you find these green dots all over the place there, Võrumaa, at Viljandi. And if I'm talking to heads of parish leaders, then they say that people are fixing up houses en masse. Who left their locations? At a parish level, it was quite awful. But those who came in were naturally young people, and they go to suburbia with their parents. Work areas and job leavers usually move out the cities. At some point, this trend is going to prevail. Nature is nice and village environment, and you can fix up the house, and that invites you to live in the countryside. Oh dear. This is a monthly data. Argovara comprises this data on a monthly basis. The prices of houses go up at an incredible level, and they say that there is such a market in Tallinn, come and buy. Yes, you can buy something. Yes, it's high. It's a lot higher than in Valga, but that is the price of an apartment. Prices of houses are non-existent because there are no houses available. If there are any, these have been fixed already. So the process is really interesting. This is a map on how many square meters can you buy for your average salary. That is 1 monthly salary, and how many square meters can it get you. In Kadriorg, in Tallinn, and elsewhere, there is a lot less area that you can buy. Perhaps a few square centimeters, not square meters. And a journalist, Vahur Kersna, admitted that he comes from Antsla, but he's now living in Tallinn, in Kadriorg. Now his wife is a minister, but before that he toyed with the idea of selling his apartment in Kadriorg. So it is a speculation. Maybe it will cost something like 300,000. But if I were to sell that apartment and buy a really good house in Antsla, where I have my memories of my childhood, and the city center could be fixed up perhaps, I could get a pretty house with a nice garden and a community where everybody respects you. Plus, for the next 25 years, you'll still have 1,000 euros a month to spend on. That could be an option, actually. And when we look at the age structure, where job leavers make up an ever bigger population, part of the population, that could be an option. Thank you very much. Slido has received quite a lot of questions, and you still have instructions on the screen to find out how to log in. And if you have anything, you finished really suddenly. But let's take the global context first of all. What makes Estonian small towns special in the context of the 120 shrinking towns in the world? Well, they are smaller. In the US, you see wind blowing among these empty buildings. It's quite clear that these drawings showed only the big ones. But small towns have shrunk even more. In Estonia, there are hundreds of villages that have nothing there. Access is the only problem there. I don't know. Ida-Viru is a typical mining area that's shrinking. Silesia is 5 times bigger, or Ruhr, that is hundreds of times bigger. I was in Detroit a few years ago, and that was quite impressive sight with people that had been evicted and so on. So we have woods, we have forests. Maybe access can be improved. A railroad bridge can be improved. Roads can be built, and access can be much better. Then that might have an impact. This have an impact on improved accesses. Haapsalu is trying to get their railroad and then convert the trend. Then that improves the outlook for smaller places as a place to live. But industry is what has saved Europe and Estonia over the past 100 years. industry needs to be more competitive. You must have jobs there where people in small towns can work to. Valga needs to have their own industry, Tõrva needs to have their own, but right now people from Tõrva go to work in Valga. All right, we need a microphone here. And you can argue. It's okay to have a different viewpoint. I'm good at arguing. Could I ask your recommendations for someone setting up a general plan? Creating the Estonian identity, creating the identity of a local area. It's easier to put it on the screen than to carry it out. What would be your recommendations for a totally new Lääneranna parish? How do you start developing a local identity in this new environment, in this new administrative location? Well, one mistake was setting up a new name, and if the name is new, nobody knows that. For Tapa, that was they had their debates in Tapa as well. There were suggestions on white ice or whatnot. No, if you have a center there, you just maintain it, or you add things to it. You need to take that into consideration. You can't play around with it. What I'm really criticizing is that people play around with it. Let's do this and that and the third thing. Pärnu is a very famous town. A city between land and the sea. Who cares? You are summer capital. Go for it and make use of it. You simply need to consider that you have people living there that have developed their own structure, and it is not in your power to change that. Just get it in your head. You can start shifting it, you can start improving it, but you can't do that with a snap of your fingers. It's just not possible because it takes 2 generations. Yes, a company can have a new brand, a new logo. K-Rauta, I can't even remember what it was before that, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. Hansabank, yes, that was ours, but now the Swedbank, who cares? But for a company, that's fine, I'll just go to another bank. But if it's a place where you live, you can't change that. You are still someone living in Lihula. You are not a Lääneranna parisher. People need to think more. What can you do? I can't. For Sompa, bulldozer might be a solution. In every few years I go to Viivikonna. There are 50 people there who want to live there. And these old little summer houses, these are occupied, but the surrounding apartment houses, no, nobody lives there. Bulldozer might be a solution. It was there is a problem that Viivikonna was handed to Narva-Jõesuu town as a gift, so they need to manage something. There is no money. All the work that hasn't been done by Kohtla-Järve, all the network, communications, cleanup, it will take several dozens of millions. Sometimes these industrial areas of what is staying in Valga, well, let's level it down and create a nice lawn. The late Mikk Pikmets, who did it in Kolga, yes, he fixed some of the hills, turned that into a sledge hill. You had new people coming there. You need to do things in a sensible way, and people are very, very grateful. Well, if people are still living in a house that you want to bulldoze down, don't do that. So you answer the question, what can be done right away? For the identity of small towns too, Kalle Leaf does that. The nuances. We need to have more social aspects to be considered. You need to create the buzz around it. But if it's too sparsely populated, there is no point in doing anything there. Yeah, you'll still have a village there. If it's a local center, it's a local center. Just to read the marks, read the landmarks.
Kas maal elama
So would it make sense to have the campaign of move back to the country and also move back to the small cities? Of course, because the same pictures we have here. I think these rural heads of rural municipalities which have an impact. So I think they would quite agree with a small campaign like that. You have a big garden and you have own vegetables, and then you have to add the sort of mobility and social aspects. And a lot of people will be very happy to live in a small place like this. And especially with the place of the history, then these tend to be very popular. Any questions from the audience? From the Green Tiger point of view, if we talk about the identity of the place versus climate change, so we cannot really talk about something being attractive and then people come, but rather these are not places which are not flooded, where we can get food and so forth. So because the identity is your job, your family, it's on the scale is only fourth, fifth place. It's not that important. It has an impact, but it's not vitally important. And of course, Estonia is doing really well compared to other places. So we have done really well. So some places would need to think about irrigation systems and well, because we have insulation against cold. If I talk to Australian colleagues, they have single pane windows. It's the wind is blowing in, and then there's air conditioning. In Ireland, it's cold, 12 degrees outside, and in Australia, it's 37. I think we are much better prepared to save energy. And the heat bubbles in Ülemiste, they measured 68 degrees on the asphalt surface. So, but in Pärnu, there's a nice breeze by the sea, it's nice. But if there is a lot of asphalt in town and we don't take the greenery into account when we were making the plans, so what is the roof material, what is the wall material? And in a small city, you have much better living environment because you're much closer to nature. Thank you very much.
Loodame, et sa jääd siia, sinuga saab vestelda veel edaspidigi.